Good evening. Hello. And welcome to the members of the Center for Global Humanities, and members in this audience, and folks watching us throughout the state. I am Anouar Majid, and the director of the Center for Global Humanities at the University of New England. I want to remind, if you're like me and take our speaker, Bill McKibben's message to heart, I want to remind all of you that our center, with its dedicated staff who have made this event possible tonight, is committed to building a better community through the power and joy of ideas. Reading, writing, and discussion are the essence of a humane and enlightened society, one that lives in harmony with its environment. Being active in your community, McKibben tells us, makes you healthier and happier. That is why our center's activities are always, I repeat, always free and open to everyone. We serve good cheeses at our receptions, by the way, too. The only thing we ask is that you join us in sustaining our programs by no more than your active participation. Just come and be here. Unless you live tens of miles away, then we'll do everything in our power to bring our programs to you, which is what we, in partnership with the Maine Humanities Council, are doing tonight. We are transmitting this event live to libraries in Lewiston, Belfast, Holton, Bangor, and our own Portland Public Library. People have read McKibben's book, Earth, the one with 2 A's in the middle, and select scholars will facilitate a discussion following this broadcast. I am also glad to be able to bring you Bill McKibben to the stage. For a while, between his activism and the demands of the media, I wondered. But no, he is here, as you probably already saw. Bill is, as you know, the author of a dozen books about the environment, beginning with The End of Nature, which was published in 1989, which is regarded as the first book for a general audience on climate change, and his moving manifesto, Deep Economy, published in 2007. He is a founder of the grassroots climate campaign 350.org and has coordinated more than 15,000 rallies in at least 189 countries since 2009. Time magazine called him the planet's best green journalist, and the Boston Globe said in 2010 that he was probably the country's most important environmentalist. Mr. McKibben is the Schumann Distinguished Scholar at Middlebury College and holds honorary degrees from a dozen of colleges, including the Universities of Massachusetts and Maine, the State University of New York, and Whittier and Colgate colleges. In 2011, he was elected a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We have no better guide to the state of our planet today, nor a better defender of what's left of our chances in these turbulent times than Bill McKibben. Please give him your warmest welcome, your best ears, and your strongest support. Bill McKibben.
Well, thank you very much. I can't actually see a damn thing, so I just assume you're out there. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be in this grand schoolhouse. What an amazing place this is, and also to be talking over the computer to Belfast and Bangor and Lewiston and Holton. I've been to all those places, even to Holton, and this is a very good low-carbon way of getting around Maine. It's a gorgeous school, and it's a beautiful night. It almost looks like one of the first real winter nights, you know. It was so beautiful to see the snowbanks and that nice sunset and the smoke rising straight up out the chimneys into the windless night, and all feels right with the world, which makes me feel all the guiltier for the kind of realization that my kind of job is to be a professional bummer-outer of people. And I apologize for that in advance, and I will try to end on a hopeful note. But first, we are going to go through the valley for a little while on the theory that I know you all know about climate change and global warming, but understanding exactly where we are and the depth of the problem is pretty important for understanding the scale and size and pace of the kind of measures we need to take to cope. So that's where I'll start. I wrote the first book about global warming now 23 years ago in 1989. And at the time, we actually knew most of what we needed to know about climate change. We know that when you burn coal and gas and oil, you put carbon into the atmosphere, and we knew that the molecular structure of carbon traps heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. Only thing we didn't really know then was how fast and how hard this was going to pinch, and the truth is it's pinching a lot harder and a lot faster than we thought it was going to. Partly that's because scientists, by their nature, are very conservative and always underestimate rather than overestimate. But I think more it's because of the psychological difficulty of understanding that things could really change. Human civilization evolved during the last 10,000 years in the period we call the Holocene, and it was a period of great stability. The atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide stayed at about 275 parts per million, give or take 5 or 10 parts per million during that period. And as a result, we think the temperature stayed pretty darn stable too. Roughly globally average, someplace around 59 degrees. But the carbon concentration of the atmosphere is not at 275 anymore. Ever since the Industrial Revolution started and we started burning all that old biology and throwing all that carbon up in the air, the number has been going up. It stands today at about 392 parts per million and rising about 2 parts per million per year. That's already increased the temperature about 1 degree of the planet. And we're pretty sure that there's another degree in the pipeline from carbon we've already emitted. The ocean holds the heat for a while, but not for very long. Now, 1 degree doesn't actually sound like all that much. I mean, if it was, 30 degrees when we walked in here and 29 when we walk out, no one will be able to tell the difference. It turns out, though, that the planet can tell the difference. It adds up to about 3/4 of a watt per square meter of the Earth's surface of extra solar energy. And that turns out to be enough to make very large changes. What do I mean? Well, everything frozen on Earth is melting and precipitously. I can't tell you, probably everybody here is younger than I am, but there might be 1 or 2 people out there who can remember those first pictures that came back from Apollo 8 of the Earth, this blue-white marble floating in the black void, and they were very beautiful pictures, and they are as out of date as my high school yearbook picture is, because since 1968, we've lost about 40% of the summer sea ice in the Arctic. The Earth does not look that way anymore. The seas themselves are about 30% more acid because chemistry of seawater changes as it absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. That's an enormous effect. maybe the most pronounced thing that we've seen in the last few years, and the one I'll just concentrate on for a moment, is changes in the Earth's hydrological cycles, the way that water moves around the planet. And these are driven by a simple fact, maybe the most important fact for understanding the century that's coming at us now, which is that warm air holds more water vapor than cold air does. So the atmosphere is about 4% wetter on average than it was 40 years ago, and that is an astonishingly large change in a basic physical phenomenon, one we think stayed more or less stable for that period of the Holocene. But the Holocene is over. We've moved out of it in the lifetime of the people in this room into some new thing. And one of the features of that new thing is this much wetter atmosphere. It means that we've loaded the dice for drought and for flood, and we're seeing both in amazing numbers. Last year, 2011, in the US, the meteorologists have just sort of finished totting up the figures, is by far the most extreme weather year for which we have records. That is, a much higher number of states of the Union in condition of either flood or drought in the course of the year than we've ever seen before. The numbers and the images are really pretty startling. Think about that drought across the American Southwest, Oklahoma and Texas. A drought so deep that it was drier and hotter than the Dust Bowl years. It never had been, and there's never been hotter summers measured on this continent than the ones that Oklahoma and Texas endured. And as a result, we saw more acreage burned across the Southwest in wildfire than ever before. And really, it was almost otherworldly. The chief of the Texas Forest Firefighting Service, one day in September, when there were huge blazes killing people and taking out large parts of the suburbs around Austin, he said, "No human being has ever fought fire in conditions like this before." And he was more or less correct. The humidity was all but nil, and the temperature was setting records. It's things like that that caused me to title this last book of mine with that odd title, Earth, misspelled with the extra A. You kind of have to channel your inner Schwarzenegger to pronounce it correctly. So, but that's what I was talking about. A planet, it kind of looks like the one we were born onto, same number of continents, gravity still works, but in fundamental ways, it's begun to shift around us. And of course, the mirror image of drought is flood. Once that water's up in the air, it's coming down. Water vapor molecule only on average stays in the atmosphere less than a week. So the dice is loaded for flood too. And boy, did we see that in this country this past year. In the spring, the Missouri and the Mississippi were carrying more water than they've ever carried before. We had to keep blowing up levees to save cities. That's because we had record snowpack. That's what happens when you have record rainfall and the temperature is below 32 degrees. And then as it melted, we had record rainfall in that Mississippi basin. And when that was done, the flooding continued with wild, unprecedented rainstorms in place after place after place. My home state of Vermont got its taste in late August when Hurricane Irene came up the East Coast. And you'll remember watching Irene make its way up. It wasn't that powerful a storm. Its winds weren't that high. But as it came over the ocean off New York and New Jersey, it encountered record high sea surface temperatures. And that allowed it like a sponge to just soak up water. And then it carried it and it dumped it, a lot of it, on Vermont. And the state darn near washed away. The town next to mine, they were dropping food by helicopter for a week because the roads were all gone and the bridges were all gone. And to understand I can give you the statistical, explain it two ways. Maybe you saw the pictures from that of covered bridges that had been there for 200 years, taking whatever nature could throw at them, washing away down rivers. That tells you something different was going on. And the statistics tell you the same thing. We have 200 years of rainfall records in New England, more really. That means there have been tens of thousands of rainstorms. And that means for those of you who ever studied statistics that if you were, it'd be very difficult to set a new rainfall record given all those precedents. But if you did, the record should come by a millimeter, an 1/8 of an inch, some tiny increment. That's how it should work. We broke one-day rainfall records across Vermont by 25 and 30%. A week later, when Tropical Storm Katie came up a little bit further west, Binghamton, New York, broke its one-day, 200-year-old rainfall record by 60%. That's what I mean when I say we're on a new planet that doesn't work the way that we're used to it working. And of course, in Vermont or in Texas or in Mississippi, we still have enough money to deal with this kind of thing. Exactly the same thing is going on in the rest of the world, someplace every day, and often in places that do not have the money to even begin to deal with it. So there's horrible drought right now underway, absolutely epic and record drought across the Horn of Africa in places like Somalia. There have been failed harvests all over the world the last 2 years, which have caused the price of grain to spike 60 and 70% and increased the roster of malnourished and hungry people by a couple of 100 million. There's flooding of epic proportions someplace almost every week. The most amazing pictures in the last few months came from Thailand, from Bangkok. Record rainfall. And this is, not some backwater place. Bangkok's one of the great cities on earth, the kind of cradle of Buddhist civilization, and it was underwater. And by the time they'd added up all the damage in Thailand from that flood, it had equaled 18% of the country's gross domestic product. That means in economic terms, it was 25 times more damaging to Thailand than Hurricane Katrina was to the United States. As far as anybody can tell, there's never been a natural disaster that took out that share of a country's economy quite like that. I could obviously go on listing things like this all day, and I won't. The things I want you to understand are that we're still in the relatively early stages of global warming. That is, the damage described so far can and will get much, much worse. We've raised the temperature 1 degree. The climatologists who've been right about everything so far are pretty clear that unless we get off coal and oil and gas very, very fast, far faster than any government's planning to, that number will be 4 or 5 degrees before the century is out, and most of that will be locked in the next little while. And there is no reason at all to think that we can deal with 4 or 5 degrees. In fact, the agronomists, a big team at Stanford and the University of Washington, published a paper last year saying, from this point on, every degree increase in global average temperature should decrease grain yields about 10%. And we're, as I say, starting to see that with these bad harvests. Try to do the kind of mental math in your head. Take what you know about the world and then imagine it with 20 or 30% fewer calories, and then try to figure out what development looks like and what women's rights look like and what public health looks like and what war and peace looks like. We can't let this happen. We cannot let this happen. It's the most important challenge by far that human beings have ever faced. And we've got to get to it, and that's what I want to talk about. Part of the response is to make our lives and our communities more resistant to the change that's coming. And in the process, make them, in fact, much more ecologically sound and less a cause of this problem. And that's a very good thing to do, and we can see it starting to happen in local ways that are really beautiful. And I know that Maine's been leading in some of these. Maybe the most obvious, it's what's been going on with local agriculture in the last little while, watching the rise of the farmer's market and things over the last 15 years has been a great pleasure. It's the fastest growing part of our food economy, local agriculture. It's now reached the point of real meaning. Last year, the United States Department of Agriculture reported that for the first time in 150 years, there were more farms in America instead of fewer. And that's really good news. And it means that, you know, one of the deep demographic trends in our society has bottomed out and reversed. And it's good news for many reasons. So the farmer's market is a beautiful symbol of all kinds of things. It's obviously ecologically sounder. You know, the 5-mile tomato makes more sense than the 500-mile tomato. It's obviously, well, it's obviously culinarily sounder. I came 500 miles yesterday. I know what I feel like. That's what the tomato feels like also, you know. But more to the point, it's also just sort of socially sounder. A couple of years ago, a pair of sociologists followed shoppers, first around the supermarket, then around the farmer's market. You all been to the supermarket, you know how it works. You walk in, you fall into a light fluorescent trance, you visit the Stations of the Cross around the market. That's about it. When they followed shoppers around the farmer's market, they had on average 10 times as many conversations per visit. They were re-knitting back together the kind of communities that we've allowed to atomize and divide and fragment in the era of high consumer hyper-individualism that we've been living through. So that kind of work is really important, and all of us should be called to it. And you can figure out all the many ways. Most of my writing in recent years has been about just that kind of work. And it's not just food, it's energy, and it's finance, and it's all the things that we can put on a new footing, all the things that we can take out of the category where they now are too big to fail, and put them in the category of small enough to make sense, you know? And that's really good work. And I wish that that was the only work that I do, because there's really nothing I'd rather do than stay home in Vermont and work. It's very good to be with you all here tonight. And but you know, I like stay at home. Everybody likes stay at home. I've hardly been at home the last couple of years. I got an email in October from my wife saying, "You do know that you've spent more nights in jail than you have at home this year, don't you?" I was like, it's not really the kind of note you want to get from your wife, but the reason that I'm on the road all that time is because if we cannot solve this larger climate crisis, then what we do locally will in the end not matter. And boy, did I get a sense of that when Hurricane Irene roared through Vermont, because Vermont's done at least as much as Maine with local food. There's very few places that have tried to build and successfully built that gorgeous local agricultural infrastructure, and a hell of a lot of it washed away. The Intervale Farms in Burlington, maybe the showpiece of Vermont, you know, 120 acres used to be the kind of informal dump in Burlington. There's now 10 farms there, nonprofit. Young farmers go there for 3 years and get a start and build a market and learn their craft and are mentored. And it's a glorious place, and it provides about 10% of the fresh food that Burlington eats, okay? But not this year. The Winooski rose, and it covered the entire place, and nobody harvested a blessed thing. And there are farms all across the state where the topsoil is now covered with sand from the river. You know? It's a sad and powerful sight to see, and a reminder that we also have to be at work on this larger scale doing something to get the planet set right. What to do about it? I'm not even going to talk about the technologies that we need, because that's the easy part and the part we've really done some work on. You know, 20 years ago when environmentalists talked about wind and sun, we did it with our fingers crossed. This stuff was not quite ready for prime time, you know. It was sort of still the province of aging hippies down in the basement with their array of lead-acid batteries, you know, and they were the great pioneers. But now it's not like that at all, you know. Now it's simple as can be. We know how to do this stuff. We're just not doing it. Let me tell you a story to illustrate what I mean. I was in China last year finishing a piece for the National Geographic about energy in China. And China's doing a lot of things wrong. They're building a lot of coal-fired power plants and emulating what we did. They'll never catch up to us as per capita emitters of carbon, but they're giving it their best shot. But they're also building an awful lot of green power, and they're leading the world in that. And one of the most visible and important elements and simple elements of that is what they've done with solar hot water. These solar hot water heaters, which are very simple and basic, are on the roofs of about 60 million buildings in China. When 250 million Chinese take a shower, the hot water is coming from solar panels on the roof. In this country, the number is way less than 1% of people. And not because they don't work. They work fine in Vermont, where I live, at that latitude. They'd work fine here. They work fine anywhere. But we just don't do it because we're, well, here's the punchline to this story. I spent the day with the guy who built the largest of these solar hot water firms, a thing called Hemin Solar, and we had a wonderful talk together for a couple of hours, an interview, and then he said, as I was leaving, he said, come into my little private museum. This guy, not surprisingly, is very rich. And there, you know, the museum was kind of odd. There were sort of like busts of great men of history, you know, Voltaire and Rousseau and things, but in the middle of it, there's this old sort of rusting solar panel, solar hot water panel. He says, you know what that is? I said, no, I don't know what. He says, that's one of the solar panels that Jimmy Carter put on the White House in 1979 and Ronald Reagan took down in 1985, you know, because he wanted manlier forms of power than that, you know. And seeing that made me realize that at bottom, this is a problem of political will, not technological know-how. We could have been doing all this for a very long time, and the reason that we're not, more than anything else, is the financial power of the fossil fuel industry to keep us from changing. They are by far the most profitable business the world has ever engaged in. Exxon last year made more money than any company in the history of money, okay? And it takes a relatively small percentage of that money to warp our political process to keep it from changing. That explains far more than anything else why we have a perfect 20-year bipartisan record of accomplishing absolutely nothing on global warming in Washington. Their business model is simple. We get to use the atmosphere as an open sewer into which to dump our main waste product, carbon, for free. Okay? That's why they're so profitable. Nobody else gets that sweetheart business deal. No restaurant in Portland is allowed at the end of the night to just shovel all its garbage out into the middle of the street and leave it. Okay? If they were, they'd make more money. They'd be more profitable. But they would also soon, you know, the city would be overrun with rats. And you'd have to, you know, be dealing with leptospirosis and things. And that's exactly why we don't allow it to happen, and why 100 years ago we started insisting that people take care of their waste. But we don't insist upon that with the fossil fuel industry, and they spend large amounts of money to make sure that no one ever will insist on it. Because they're so powerful, the strategy that environmentalists have used for 20 years to try and make progress on this probably isn't really ever going to quite work. The strategy, which made perfect rational sense, was basically to have our scientific leaders sit down with our political leaders and explain over and over and over again that the most dangerous thing the world had ever seen was in the process of happening and that they needed to take action. Okay? And that's how it should work. You know, if the greatest scientists in the world say, look, we're driving off a cliff, then the job of political leaders is to turn the wheel and keep us from going off. But while the scientists were talking rationally in one ear, the fossil fuel industry was bellowing in the other ear, threats and promises. And they drowned out that noise and prevented action, and they had the money to make those threats and promises stick. So we're going to have to figure out, if we're going to make progress, some other currency in which to work. Because we're never going to match them in money, so it's going to have to be something else, passion and spirit and creativity. And that's what I want to talk about for just a moment here. I want to talk about organizing, movement building. It's not something I know an immense amount about. It's not what I set out in my life to do. In fact, just the opposite. I'm a writer. Writers are people who are self-selected to want to sit in their room and type. Okay? It is hard for us to get up on stages and talk to people and go out and have meetings and, you know, I took my, someone had me take the other day on the line one of those Briggs-Meyer or whatever it's called, personality tests. And I was off the introverted end of the chart, you know? I mean, it was painful. But in the last few years, we've done our best to figure out how to organize and make a difference. I'll just tell you quickly the story about 350.org. In the winter of 2008, well, we'd actually, in the fall of 2007, which came after the summer with the huge, great Arctic ice melt and really just panicked scientists calling me all the time and things. We decided we were going to have to try to do global organizing, which is a ludicrous thing to even imagine because the globe is a huge place, and also because everyone insists on speaking their own language, which makes it very hard to organize. But we wanted to try to do it. I called up my friend Jim Hansen at NASA and said, you know what? Since we're going to have to work across language boundaries, we can't use words, we're going to need numbers. What's the number? How much carbon is too much? And he said, you know, I've been wondering that same thing myself. And he and his team spent a few months producing a paper that came out in January of 2008, maybe the most important scientific paper of the millennia to date. And what it said was that any value for carbon in the atmosphere greater than 350 parts per million was too much. In fact, they said, see if I can quote it still, said any value in that, greater than that is not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. Okay, so that's strong language. And stronger still if you know, as I told you earlier, that we're already at 392 parts per million. We're already too high, and so to read that was a kick in the teeth in a sense. It meant we're never going to solve global warming. We're just going to keep it from getting worse than it otherwise would. Okay? We're fighting not for the world that we knew, but to prevent a world that we can't imagine. But the number was good because we said to ourselves, at least we'll be able to take this Arabic numeral and we'll mean the same thing every place, you know, in Maine and in Moscow and in Mongolia and wherever else. We'll be able to speak the same language. And that was good that we had that advantage because we didn't have too much else. The we in this case was me and 7 people your age, 7 seniors at Middlebury College in Vermont, where I teach a little. They were seniors, so they weren't done with school, but they were done with school, if you know what I mean. And 7 was actually a very good number because there are, in fact, 7 continents, so each one of them took one. And the one that took the Antarctic also had to take the internet, you know, because it's kind of its own continent. And off we went, and we tried to organize. We tried to find people like ourselves around the world. You know, they're not environmentalists everywhere, but everywhere there's someone concerned with public health, with hunger, with war and peace and social justice and development, all the things you can't do. I mean, all the things no one's working on in Thailand right now because they're still trying to, drain people's homes and keep them, heads under cover and so on. Those are the people we found. And we said to them, well, if we didn't know what we were doing, and we said, we're going to just try to have a sort of day that's a kind of coming out party for this number, try to inject it into the bloodstream of the planet so that people, more than anything else, understand from it that we're already too high, that global warming is not some future abstract problem, but something happening right now all around us. And we did training camps for young people in Turkey, for Central Asia, in the Caribbean. We did one in Johannesburg. We brought a couple of kids from every country in Africa down to Johannesburg. Most had never left their country before, been on an airplane, but they were fantastic organizers, and they all fanned out across Africa and Asia and every place else. And we knew they were working. We didn't know how, you can't just Skype everybody all the time easily in every place in the world, so we didn't know exactly what was going on. But we told everybody October 24th, 2009, that would be the first day when we would do this. And we got the sense that it might work 2 days early, October 22nd. We're sitting in the office, in a little borrowed office in Manhattan, around one room with a table and 8 of us there with our laptops open, tapping away press releases and things. And the phone rings, and it's a bad satellite phone connection from Ethiopia. And there's a 17-year-old girl on the phone, Lily, one of these girls. She and her sister had come down to South Africa, her 18-year-old sister, and they were our organizing team in the country of Ethiopia. And Lily was in tears, pretty much, and she said, the government's taken away our permit for Saturday, for our big rally. So we're doing it today before they can stop us. And we're so sorry. We don't mean to jump the gun. We don't want to spoil it for people. We were so looking forward to doing it at the same time as everybody else. And there are 15,000 people out in the street right now in Addis Ababa chanting 350. And so I was like, Lily, don't worry about the date. It's okay. And, And after that, the pictures just flowed in from all around the world for the next 72 hours or so. There are about 5,100 of these demonstrations in 181 countries. CNN said it was the most widespread day of political activity in the planet's history. And that was, the second one was from US soldiers in Afghanistan. 350 with sandbags said, we're parking our Humvee for the weekend and walking, I'll just flip through a few of these, just mainly because I want you to see who your brothers and sisters are around the world who are working on these things. And the thing that I want you most to notice about, because the thing that struck me, was that this trope I have heard 1,000 times in my life, that environmentalism is something for rich white people who have taken care of their other problems, and if you had to worry about where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist. It's simply not true. Most of the people that we work with around the world are poor and black and brown and Asian and young, because that's what most of the world is made up of. And oddly, they are every bit as concerned with the future as anybody else, maybe more so, because the future bears down hard on you in those categories. And so there's pictures coming from places I'd never heard of. And we had 300 big demonstrations across India. There's the India Youth Climate Network, and places we couldn't identify. There's someplace in Buddhist Asia, and places that were really poor. That's someplace on the Congo River above Kinshasa. They didn't even have a digital camera. They tried to develop the picture in someone's home darkroom. It obviously didn't come out so well, so they wrote in what their banner had said. But it just moved me to pieces to see people in, that's what Conrad called the heart of darkness in his slightly Eurocentric way once upon a time. But there they were, and the same all over the world. Huge involvement and beautiful and creative. That's from the Space Needle in Seattle. That's the colors of the Venezuelan flag. That's, hopefully they didn't stop for too long. Amazing images, and some of them really beautiful. One of the things that was really great was to see faith communities deeply involved for the first time in something like this. There's the head of Muslim South Africa, next to him the head of kind of indigenous traditions behind in the scarlet, Archbishop Tudu's successor as Anglican Archbishop at the head of a huge multi-faith march across Cape Town. Pentecostal school. There's the most important evangelical college in America, a place where a few years ago there would not have been an environmental demonstration, but it was very good to see it happening. I'd been to Bethlehem to do some organizing, hard place to get to, because there's a lot of checkpoints and things in the way. But the Dead Sea is shrinking very rapidly as temperatures rise, and people wanted to do something. There were too many military barriers to get across, so the Jordanians said, we'll make the 3 on our shore, and the Palestinians said, we'll do the 5 in Palestine, and the Israelis said, we'll do the 0 on our beach. And it was a beautiful thing, and a reminder that it might be a good idea to put aside some of our other concerns every once in a while to deal with the ones that really overpower us. And we had a lot of that kind of global Scrabble going on, you know, big numbers, and we looked for iconic places. So in India, palaces, but it was an autumn Saturday in America, so you know, there's the Syracuse cheerleaders helping us out in front of 100,000 people at Syracuse, and you know, just everywhere around the world, place after place, including all around Maine, just beautiful, beautiful stuff going on. There's a lot of good climbers that you can. There's the banner. You can see how big it is now. Find it there on the wall of the canyon, you know. Soweto, heartland of resistance to apartheid. They did 350 bungee jumps that day, but the best part of it was that they strung the bungee line between the cooling towers of a defunct coal-fired power plant. And they sent a note just saying, this is the best use for coal-fired power plants going forward. And they were absolutely right. There's my daughter in there someplace, you know, in our sap buckets, because our eastern forest will not fare well in this. 300 big demonstrations across China. Not an easy place to do this. One of them got busted up by the police, but most went okay. There's the China Youth Climate Network making a human wind turbine, and if you look carefully behind them, you can see the edge of the largest wind field on the planet, you know. Place after place after place. Our friends in the Maldives, the most magnificent country involved in this in the whole world. Beautiful place, paradise, 1,200 islands strung across the equator in the Indian Ocean, white sand beaches, a culture that stretches back 5,000 years. The highest point in the archipelago is about 1 meter above sea level, okay? The odds of that 5,000 becoming 5,100 are slim. But they're doing everything they can. By 2020, they'll be the first carbon neutral nation on Earth. They are building windmills and things as fast as they can, even though they're a poor country. And they're doing all the kind of, the Student Government Association holding its meeting in the lagoon to demonstrate the problem, you know. Amazing place, entirely Muslim nation, completely involved in this work. And well, they should shame us all a little bit with their work. And it was a beautiful day, and it was the lead story on Google News for 36 hours, partly because we were in interesting places, but mostly because the people who were involved didn't look like what other people thought environmentalists looked like, you know. That 0 in that picture from Yemen, that's all women in full black burqa, you know. It doesn't look like Sierra Club, you know, at their meeting. But that's the point. They're just as, you know. And I confess that there was a file of 600 or 700 pictures just labeled 350 adorable. And they really were adorable. And they really were bittersweet, too. You know, at the beginning of the 19th century, no one could look at, there were going to be bloody wars and refugees and things, but no one in, you know, 1912 could sit and predict who 50 years later were going to be the refugees unless we got our act together. And that's what we can do without any problem here. So it was a beautiful day, and it helped. We got to Copenhagen, the big climate conference 6 weeks later, with a lot of momentum. And we convinced 117 nations to sign on to this 350 target. So that was good. You know, from 7 college kids for a couple of years of work, it was nice. The trouble is they were the wrong 117 nations. They were all the poor ones. The rich ones, the addicts, led by us, weren't yet ready to do anything, so that conference fizzled, and then, you know, nothing happened. The US Senate wouldn't even bring itself to take a vote on the most mild, tepid climate legislation you could imagine. That next summer, they were so scared of the fossil fuel industry, they wouldn't even vote. And I was worried all this movement would fall apart. People would just be so depressed, but happily people are made of sterner stuff than I, and we've had 2 more of these big global days of action, and they've just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. The last one this last fall we called Moving Planet, and it was all about transportation, and there were people on bicycles in huge numbers in pretty much everywhere, every country on Earth involved except North Korea. And it's all great and powerful and just that kind of currency that we need to be working in, spreading the word. And it's also not enough because of that power in the fossil fuel industry that's so hard to break. So we need other kinds of currencies too. And sometimes we need to spend our bodies even. And I'll just tell briefly the story of this work over the last 6 or 8 months about this fight over this Keystone pipeline thing out of Alberta. 6 or 8 months ago, nobody really had heard of it. I hadn't really heard of it. But then again, Jim Hansen at NASA said to me one day, you know, there's a lot of carbon up there in those tar sands. That's the 2nd biggest pool of carbon on Earth. If you could burn it all tonight, which happily you can't, but if you could, we would take the atmosphere's carbon concentration from 390 parts per million to 540 parts per million just from that one deposit, okay? He said if you tap into it heavily, it's essentially game over for the climate. And so that got us to work, and the place we went to work was this proposed pipeline that would start really opening up those tar sands to exploitation, and we rallied against it. And we knew that, you know, we knew that the other guys were going to win unless we were able to really raise its profile. And so we did what I thought we needed to do. A bunch of us went to Washington and did civil disobedience and got arrested. Over 2 weeks, there were 1,253 people. There were 1,253 people put in jail. It was the biggest civil disobedience action in 30 years in this country, and it was really beautiful. I got to see all of it except for the 3 days when I was in jail. I got to watch it, you know, it all every day. And I told people earlier, one of the things we told people was, it should not be young people, college kids, that have to carry this burden. It should be mostly those of us older, because we've spent our lives pouring carbon into the atmosphere, and because, and I really mean this, guys, if you're 18 right now, you know, an arrest record is probably in our economy not going to be your greatest asset, okay? But once you've reached a certain age, what the hell are they going to do to you? You know, I mean, it's like there are few enough things that get easier with age, but that kind of calculation is one of them. And so it was great. We didn't ask people how old they were. That would be rude. We asked them, who was president when you were born? And the biggest cohorts came from the FDR and the Truman administrations. Okay, so that was good. And we also told everybody, if you're coming, wear a necktie or put on a dress. Because we really want to demonstrate the truth of this matter, which is that we are not the radicals here. Not at all. We're trying to conserve the world in something like the fashion that we knew it when we were born. Radicals work at oil companies. They are willing to alter the chemical composition of the atmosphere in order to make money. That is the most radical thing that any human being has ever done. Alter the chemical composition of the one atmosphere that we have. It is crazy radical. And yet, because they have a lot of money, we think of it as normal. At any rate, those arrests, we spent our bodies well. We were kind of anteed up in this game and raised the profile enough that suddenly a lot of people started hearing about it. And then we circled the White House 5 deep in people. And indeed, having raised its profile, we were able to convince the administration that it was a good idea to take more time and review it more carefully. And they agreed to do that, and that was right. And they did that in November, but in December, the Congress went to work. And we think of the Congress as the most, democratic part of our, small d, democratic part of our government, the place where we should have the most access and, so on and so forth. They didn't hold hearings and have experts in for days and try to figure out what was going on with this. They voted 234 to 193 to speed up consideration of the pipeline, and those 234 people who wanted to expedite this thing, between them had taken $42 million from the fossil fuel industry for their campaigns. That's wrong. I know that it's like realistic and how things get done. It's still wrong, and we've got to stop it. I was saying to people earlier today, I gave a little talk at the Portland courthouse today because there was a little demonstration to mark the 2nd anniversary of that Citizens United thing, that sort of opened up fully the money spigots for corporate America, interfere in our political life. And I said, this is just, it's cheating. If the Patriots make the Super Bowl and Bob Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, is caught giving money to the referees beforehand, it's a national scandal. Everybody would be outraged. But if Exxon does it, then it's okay. That's crazy, and we've got to stop it. Right now, last week, the House, the Congress, told the president that he had to make a decision within 60 days, which was ludicrous because they don't even have a route yet for the pipeline. How are you supposed to evaluate it? And so the president, quite bravely, the other day said, no, we're going to deny the permit for this thing. It was brave because 3 or 4 days before, the American Petroleum Institute had issued the most naked of threats. The head of it, this is, Mr. Big Oil, said, do this, and we will exact huge political consequences, quote, unquote. So Barack Obama did not just the right thing, but the brave thing. They have... And I say that as someone who's obviously not a big sort of knee-jerk partisan, I got arrested outside the guy's house, okay? But this was good. But today, they're back at it. They're going to attach it to the next payroll tax hike, because they don't work for us. They work for the oil industry, That's who employs them, okay? If you take money, think about what it means to take money from someone, okay? If you, at Christmas time, got a present from someone who you didn't give one to, you'd forgotten or something, you felt bad, and you felt, and that's like for a pair of socks, If someone gives you $100,000 for your campaign, well, what do you think happens? We can't afford to keep doing that, and so we're going to have to, we can't afford bad policy decisions year after year that pay no attention to reality, to physics and chemistry. So we're going to have to take that on. And I don't know whether we can win. I don't know whether we'll win on this pipeline, even if we win for right now. It's a temporary victory. All environmental victories are temporary, and stopping one pipeline doesn't stop that much. We're going to have to do bigger, deeper change. And I don't know whether we can. I wish I could guarantee to you that all of this was going to work, and I can't. There are scientists who think that we waited too long to get started, that the momentum of this heating is too great to be effectively reversed. The consensus is we still have room not to stop global warming, but at least to prevent it from getting completely out of control. But that window is clearly small and closing. There are political scientists who think it's impossible, that there is too much money on the other side. So far, they've been right. If you were a betting person, you would bet that we weren't going to be able to do anything to beat them. But that's not a bet that you're allowed to make. The price of being a morally awake person when the worst thing that ever happened on the planet is in the process of happening is to get up in the morning and try to figure out what you can do to change those odds, even with no guarantee of victory. Can't guarantee you that we'll win. Can guarantee you, because I've been in motion the last 3 or 4 years all over the planet, that there are people in rooms like this all over the earth trying to figure out what they can do to come together to do something about it. And I know, I guarantee you, that they will fight, and many of them will fight in these countries that have done nothing to cause this problem. And they look very much to us to exert some leadership because we have real power and real control over much of what happens. So I don't know how it's going to end. I do know that it's going to be a fight, and I do know that I look forward to doing it, fighting it shoulder to shoulder with you all and seeing how it comes out. And I thank you enormously for coming here tonight and listening to me. Thank you. Now I can see you. That's good. Yeah, close. Now as is often the case, okay. I fear I've rattled on longer than I should, but Anouar, we have time for some questions from here and from those
yes, we do.
Far-flung points across Maine, yes? So.
Yes, we do. And those who want to ask questions, could you please line up on this side of the lecture hall, and we'll try to accommodate as many people as possible.
Can you talk about methane?
This side of the lecture hall.
My question is about methane.
Stop this, stop this.
It's generally thought that coal is the worst in terms of greenhouse emissions. And I'm guessing that's not true, because it seems to me that the extraction of natural gas is very poorly executed. And they say that it's the cleanest burning fuel, but of course, that's only a half-truth, because you've got to extract it. So my guess is that there's a lot of methane being leaked while they extract the natural gas, and then that is the worst fuel that we can pursue.
So this is a very interesting question, and let's back up and just think about energy in general right now. We've essentially run out of the easy stuff, okay? When people talk about peak oil, that's what they mean. So, there's no longer, Saudi Arabia is running dry. We're no longer able to count on that kind of easy stuff. What we should have done once we figured that out was say, okay, that means we really should go to work, not just because of global warming, but for lots of reasons. We should deeply, quickly go to work on this renewable transition. But instead, what we've tended to do is say, This means we should quickly try to find what hydrocarbons we can around the planet. And so we have, for instance, we've gone after extreme energy. We've done deep sea drilling, we've done mountaintop removal, we've done tar sands, and we do this, what you would call fracking for natural gas. Exploding things a mile or so beneath the surface, exploding small bombs, really, to fracture the subsurface geology so more gas will leak out. And your suspicion is correct about what it is that's, what results when that happens. We don't actually really know all the details yet because no one's studied it. We're just going ahead and doing it. But the first studies indicate that you release enough methane. When you burn methane, it's cleaner than coal. But if you release it, CH4, if you release it directly into the atmosphere, if some of it leaks out, then it's much more potent molecule for molecule greenhouse gas.
20 times more potent.
Yeah, or more, depending on how you measure the, over what time frame you're interested in. I'm just trying to find a couple of numbers here.
My guess is that when they frack, they're not collecting it all, and it's leaking.
Yes, so the first studies seem to indicate that that's the case, and that, in fact, it's at least as dirty as coal. The point is that we can't make any of these calculations about what we should do rationally because we don't have any price on carbon or other greenhouse gases to reflect the damage that they do. And because of that, we end up doing things that turn out to be crazy. You would not go near the tar sands if you had a price on carbon because it wouldn't pay. It would be too expensive to do. So the fight against, we need to fight all these things piece by piece. Let's stop fracking, let's stop this pipeline, let's do all that. It's very important to do. But we really can't, we're like the little Dutch boy in the leaking dike, and we're way out of fingers. We've got to figure out how to attack it systemically. And that's why increasingly we're doing our work around this money and politics stuff. We'll be up on Capitol Hill on Tuesday with 500 or 1,000 people in referees' shirts, okay, blowing the whistle on Congress, pointing out that we have to change the series of subsidies that we give to fossil fuel industries. And the biggest of that subsidy is the right to just use the atmosphere as an open sewer.
The price on carbon wouldn't even solve this problem because this is unburnt methane.
Well, the price on greenhouse gases would solve this problem. Right. And if there was a price on carbon, we would not be going after natural gas in that way. If you want to get involved in this, now I should have said this earlier, and I'm very technologically unoriented. I mean, you can go to 350.org and just sign up. But for those of you who are cell phone carriers, if you turn them back on now, and I know you politely turned them off before, but I'm testing, I haven't done this before, but I kind of want to test it. Where I live, cell phones don't even work, so I don't even really, it's outside my ken, but that makes me a tiny percentage of the world's population now, because no matter where you get, back of beyond in Bangladesh or something, people have cell phones. Well, if you text to this number, 50555, 50555. If you text the word, it's not really a word, but it's close to a word. If you text the word plug-in, all one word, Plugin, plug-in, to that number, then you'll be on the list to get the kind of action updates and things from 350.org so we can keep track of you and put you to work, because everybody's got to work. That's the problem, or that's the opportunity. We need you in this fight. And as I said before, we need you in this fight, old or young, okay? Because everybody's got things they can bring to it now. And it's powerful and moving to see that happen.
Hi, Bill. My name is Glenn Brand. I'm the new director of the main chapter of the Sierra Club. And as many of the people here know, we're launching a campaign to stop this pipeline from bringing tar sands through northern New England, through Vermont, New Hampshire, and ending up in South Portland to ship to the Gulf Coast and elsewhere. And I was hoping that you would comment on that.
Sure. It's, you know, it doesn't look like it's absolutely immediate threat to happen tomorrow, but it's I'm very glad you all are keeping an eye on it and working, mobilizing to keep it from even getting started. And the same kind of thing is going on all over the place. One of the things that the oil companies keep saying is, oh, if you don't have the Keystone pipeline, we'll just put another pipeline in hither and yon. They usually say, we'll put a pipeline into the Pacific so we can send all this to China, and then won't you be sorry? Which is odd because the pipeline that the Keystone pipeline was going to the Gulf of Mexico and everything was going to get exported anyway. But in fact, the people up in Canada are fighting that pipeline, and they're fighting it really well. A majority of Canadians oppose that gateway, so-called gateway pipeline, and the First Nations people up there are doing a fantastic job, and now you guys are holding down the fort here. One of the things that was best about this pipeline fight was that for once, the whole environmental community was working in tandem together, you know, and the Sierra Club was a huge part of it. Mike Brune, the wonderful new leader of the Sierra Club, and all his crew were doing a great job, and everybody was. And that was really good to see, because it's, you know, the sort of division in environmental community, the sort of endless multiplicity of environmental groups and things has been somewhat of a problem over the years, and it was really fun to see that change. So thank you enormously for your work, and we'll help however we can. Microphone.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Okay. And I was wondering methodology, because I get confused whether I should be just getting bees and growing a garden and doing that, but you say the bigger problem is we all need to come together and take care of the big problem first. So,
well,
wait.
Simultaneous.
Simultaneous. Huh, I also have a full-time job. Yeah, okay. So anyway, maybe I can quit that. But anyway, I'm with Occupy, and I tend to think that Occupy is the overreach for Sierra Club, the unions, 350.org, Code Pink, veterans, blah, 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 blah. Think of everybody in the splinter group, and I was wondering, do you think we can all come together under Occupy?
I think Occupy is a great thing. I got to speak at 9 different Occupy encampments last fall. I was kind of Occupy tourist, you know, around the, and they were very fun because they all reflected their particular place. Like you got to Occupy Boulder, and everybody there was just as like handsome and well as everybody else in Boulder. You know, it looked like they were like filming the Occupy catalog or something. You know. They gave me a gift bag, you know, when I made my speech. It was great. You know, when I went down to Zuccotti Park right early on, what I said was, thank God, you know, it's about time. Wall Street's been occupying the atmosphere for a quarter century. It's about time we return the favor, you know. And so I do think that a lot of this energy this year is going to circle around this question of money in politics and corporate personhood. My wonderful Senator Bernie Sanders has just introduced a piece of legislation that would change the Constitution to make sure that corporations aren't people. And so we're going to get all behind this. That's why we're going to be up on, that's why we've got all these referee shirts going out all over the country. We all got to work together on all of this stuff. And that's, I think, what's really happening, and it's fun to see. Possible. There's many, many things we can try.
Good evening. I'm Diane Messer. I reside in the town of Liberty. I believe in the currency of the human body also. I was one of the 1,253 in front of the White House. A little bit of my question was already stolen. I guess that's hard to avoid when you got a lot of creative thinkers all in the same place. We're heating up the atmosphere, sorry. My question was going to be, I realize you feel most comfortable in the mantle of writer and scholar and educational opportunities for all and understanding and learning, but like it or not, you've been thrust into the spotlight of political activist. And what you hit on earlier about Senator Bernie Sanders introducing the amendment, the need for an amendment to take corporate personhood away. There's a lot of other people in this country that are working towards that also.
Yes.
And I would like to see that be a central focus of our action from here on out, because
Absolutely.
that is the root of the control of all this money and buying our congresspeople.
Absolutely. And I was saying to people earlier when we had this little discussion on campus, you know, for me it's really important in a sense as a writer, because words, I take words seriously. And it's really worth remembering that corporations aren't people. That is to say, people, you know, are interesting and complicated and sometimes perverse. We do have instincts and selfish drives and things that lead us in one direction, but we also have lots of countervailing forces. We can remember our ancestors. We can imagine our children. You know, there are powerful, strange forces that corporations know nothing about, you know, like sex. There are, you know, things that head us in all, you know, that sort of turn us around, like religion and art, that often have us acting in ways that you wouldn't predict from our particular. We're complicated. We're not perfect, obviously. We're complicated. Corporations aren't evil, they're simple, okay? They're, you know, I was saying earlier, they're like, if you want to think of them as an organism, they're, you know, they're like single-celled organisms on a petri dish, and you put some sugar at one end and they all wriggle in that direction, okay? And that's as it should be. That's why they're useful, because they're good at, you know, organizing themselves for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's why, properly regulated, they're useful things, okay? But they're not people. They don't, that's not only that they don't deserve the title, they're just a very different thing. And that single-mindedness is what should disqualify them from participating in political life in that way, because they're not subject to all those other things that have turned us into the sort of creatures that might be able to keep this civilization up and running. Might not too. We're going to find out in the next, you know, the next period's going to be a test of whether the big brain was a useful adaptation or not, you know. Whether or not it's connected, I think in the end, whether or not it's connected to a big enough heart to get us out of the trouble that it's gotten us into. We'll find out.
If you'll permit me one very brief follow-up on that. We've seen what kind of misfortune we've had trying to push this agenda on the national level, but a lot of people have taken it to their communities, to their towns, to their counties, to their states, and right here in the great city of, well, we're close enough to Portland, sorry, no disrespect to Westbrook, but in the great city of Portland, the city council has passed an ordinance denying corporate personhood.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that, and I'm very pleased to report that in Ripton, Vermont, population 400, we've collected enough signatures at recycling last week that it'll be on the town meeting warrant in March. And as a veteran political analyst at town meeting, I'm virtually certain that we will join you in this thing come March. So.
Hi, Bill. I'm John Haley. I'm a science teacher. I live in Falmouth, Maine. And I was wondering, how do you respond to skeptics of climate change?
Well, the skepticism, for the most part, around climate change isn't rooted in science. It's rooted in ideology, okay? Which makes it difficult to respond to in a kind of way that might persuade anyone. The syllogism in people's minds, I think, is free markets solve all problems. Free markets are not solving global warming. Therefore, global warming is not a problem, okay? Which is illogical, but emotionally comforting, you know, in that sense. And the real irony of it is that, in fact, markets would do a great deal to solve this problem if we would ever put a price on carbon, okay? That's the kind of strange thing about it. In terms of people who doubt the science, there are not that many of them, oddly. The polling data shows more than 3/4 of Americans understand that the climate is warming, and most of them that we're the cause. You know, I don't waste an enormous amount of time trying to persuade the people who are still reluctant about this, in part because, as I say, they're often unpersuadable for political reasons, but also because it's my sense that Mother Nature is going to teach them and all of us over and over and over again. We seem to be encountering an almost endless series of what you might call in your classroom teachable moments, you know, as we see flood after hurricane, after drought, after fire, after whatever else. And we do need always to be paying attention to that and to be pointing out when those things happen that they shouldn't be happening in the kind of numbers or in the kind of scale that we see them happening. And that's really, really useful. And it's one of the reasons, oddly, that I've always found it easier to talk with people in rural areas than suburban areas about climate change, because the suburbs are kind of a tool for making you not notice the natural world around you, you know. But people who live in the country, even though they tend to be politically conservative, also, you know, there's really not that much to think about, so we think about the weather a good deal of the time, you know, and it becomes very obvious what it is that's going on, you know. My small town in Vermont had its 2 biggest rainstorms ever in the summer of 2008, and our town all but washed away. Well, there's not a person left in Ripton who's not completely convinced. You know, there's a few people who think I'm a nut, but there's, you know, who are not completely convinced that something very big is afoot.
Hello, my name is Sally Holmes, and I go to school in Waterville at Colby College. And I was wondering, in terms of developing countries, what are your views on paying for methods of transitioning away from energies that contribute to climate change?
That's a very, very good question. So if the single biggest problem that we have in making this transition is the power of the fossil fuel industry, the second biggest is the gulf between rich and poor countries, okay? Because there's a lot of places that are very poor, and where the easiest way to become slightly less poor would be to do exactly what we did, which is burn up, you know, dig up the coal that's lying all over the world and burn it, okay? And it's not sufficient to say to them, sorry, we've already filled the atmosphere, you find something else to, you know, because unlike us, they actually, you know, at the moment, they can't really afford to just skip straight to, I mean, it makes great sense to take them straight to solar energy or whatever, because they tend to be equatorial and because they don't have the built infrastructure that we do already. It would make, just as it made great sense to go straight to cell phones instead of installing telephone poles. But financially, we have to be there helping. It's both our moral and our practical duty, having become rich burning fossil fuel, to take some small percentage of that. And a pretty small percentage. I mean, you know, supposedly the fund that will be set up beginning in 2020 by the international community will be $100 billion a year to help all the poor countries of the world. But so far, no one stepped up to, you know, find out where that money's coming from. When you know, Citibank needs money, we step up and figure it out, okay? But when we have money for problems on an almost unimaginably larger scale where people would really be helped, we're not doing that yet. And it's one of the things we really need to work on, and it's probably the most important thing that we try to do at these endless series of international conferences like the one that just ended in Durban. The progress has been small, and I think it's probably one of the most important reasons that we work hard to elect generous and open-minded people to public office in this country, because we're going to need to go back to being a little generous and open to the rest of the world in the years ahead. Good question.
Thank you.
Hi, Bill and everybody. I'm a University of New England student, ENV major, Nicholas. And I'm lucky enough to work in the Office of Sustainability there at UNE. And well, we were wondering, you know, we have this great opportunity to meet you. What can we do? We live, we school, we learn, and we do everything on campuses and with faculty and other students. What can we do to help?
So a couple of things. I mean, you can figure out all the like practical things, like you've long since you figured out like what kind of light bulbs, and let's turn off have computers, and we'll make the copier print double-sided, and all that kind of stuff. You don't need me to tell you that, okay? But you can take it the next step. That at any, certainly in New England, any university, it's the heating and cooling, especially the heating function that takes up a huge amount of energy, and you can figure out ways to change that and do interesting things with it. That's what we've worked a lot on at Middlebury, where I am. But just as important, you can make sure that you're getting people at UNE or at Colby or anyplace else organized to be politically involved in this fight too. Because in the end, that's going to pay at least as large a dividend. And in fact, in the case of Maine, it's incredibly important. You guys actually are one of the few states that have a couple of senators who are who sometimes change their minds about things, and occasionally, not very often, but occasionally can be persuaded to cross over and do things, whatever. Well, you got to persuade them on some of this stuff, if Olympia Snow said, no, we're not going to do the Keystone Pipeline, that would be an enormous help, for instance. The final thing I'd say to people in college is this. Pay attention to remember I talked before about farmers markets and all the people having the conversations and things and how important that was. A huge problem in our society, and one of the things that drives the patterns that we have, is that we are so hyper-individualistic. Okay, since the end of World War II, we've spent most of the wealth in this country on the project of building bigger houses farther apart from each other, okay? And that's both driven up the amount of energy we use almost exponentially, and it's actually resulted in us becoming somewhat less happy. When you survey Americans to ask them how happy they are with their lives, the number of people who say they're very happy peaked in 1956 and has gone down since, which makes sense because we run into each other less often. The average American has half as many close friends as they did 50 years ago. So the reason I'm saying this in relation to college is that it's, for people who are resident in a college anyway, it's an interesting 4 years. It's the only 4 years in the average American life when you live the way that most human beings live for most of human history, i.e. in close physical and emotional proximity to a lot of other people. And that's why we like it. When the old, when people wander back at reunion time, sort of, stagger across the campus saying, those were the best years of my life. It's not like I'm desperate to take Sociology 101 again, It's, I had a lot of friends. There were always people around to do things with. The irony of American higher education, of course, is that we take it as our mission to equip you to earn so much money that you'll never have to live that way again, you know. But you don't have to do that. You can think more creatively about what kind of, and so just take note of what's going on around you, you know. And if you like it, take that as a clue for how you might organize your life later, would be what I'd say.
Hello, I'm Jasper Hansel, and I'm a student at Cape Elizabeth Middle School. And I would like to ask that it seems that climate change is a battle that people can't afford to lose. So it seems that America works in the way of whoever has the most money has the most voice. So how do people consider trying to use money to get a voice in Congress?
Well, it's a good question. The problem with trying to outbid the fossil fuel industry is that they have, I mean, I'm not a theologian, but they have more money than God, you know, and so it's difficult to outbid them. And so I think it's one of the reasons why the best strategy for just what you're saying would be to limit the amount of money that people can give to candidates running for office, and that certainly that companies can give. I mean, Maine's taken some steps along this way. It's entirely obvious that we'd be a lot better off publicly financing campaigns, because now, instead of paying, you know, a fairly small sum to finance, we pay huge sums in, think about what will happen later this year. We'll adopt a new budget, and it will include $20–30 billion in subsidies for the fossil fuel industry, okay? This is an industry that needs no subsidy. They are the richest industry on earth. Why we would give them more money? Because they've given small presents to congressmen in the form of campaign donations, and in return, those congressmen are now going to give them large presents back with our money, okay? That's how it works. So it would make a lot more sense to stop the present giving, you know? And make this a kind of clean system. I don't think we can outbid people, but I do think that if you've got someone running for Congress who's good, you should get out there and work your tail off for them. And beginning at your age, you can do immense amounts of things to make that happen. You know, you can knock on every door in your town and make sure that everybody knows that what young people want are this set of issues paid attention to. And that makes a great deal of sense. It never surprises me that the people who are, you know, so many of the people who work with us around the world are young people. Look, I'm 51 now, so I've got, you know, another, if I'm lucky, 25 years or something. You've got 70 years, you know. So it's very much in your interest to make sure that the planet's in as good shape as it possibly can be. So get out there and knock on doors. That's what I'd say.
Okay. And one other thing that I just wanted to add is you said that businesses are like single-celled organisms. And one thing about single-celled organisms is they're pretty adaptable. So what I'm wondering is, like, if we take off all those subsidies to those big businesses, I'm pretty sure they can adapt.
I agree with you. And it's a very good point. It's very well put. And if you think about it, I mean, that's what we're talking about. If we say we put a price on carbon, okay, we're going to make you pay for what the damage, well, then pretty quickly, Exxon and BP and stuff will decide we're not going to be in the tar sands business anymore, but we're energy companies, so we're going to be in the solar panel business, the wind turbine business, the geothermal business, the whatever it is. It's only because we let them pour the carbon into the atmosphere for free that they make such huge amounts of money, and they've become addicted to that stream of profit. And we really just have to say you can't do it anymore.
Wow, that was a hard act to follow. My name's Liz Newman. I'm an architect in Portland, and in trying to make my work be more helpful, I try to do all the things that you probably know about. I was really happy to go to a conference a few years ago and find out that not only are we getting houses to net zero, where they produce all their own energy, but we're getting to net positive, where we're generating power for other things. And to me, this is a step in the direction of not just reducing and being less harmful, but in healing. And then 10-10-10 Day of Action, Portland offered 4 activities. One of them was called a permablitz, and I went, and it's a permaculture-based barn raising where 30 of us started a local lots trip to being planted as being used as a permaculture site. We did a composting bin, a hoop house, took out a bunch of grass to do blueberry bushes, on and on. And it made me start thinking more and more about dirt. So I'll try to keep this quick, but my question was, now when I look at a property with someone, or I'm going to put a house on it, I say, don't just think about being solar ready, think about being food ready. Is your house going to make a shadow on the best place where you or someone might want to be planting your own food later? And in permaculture, you can also heal by building soil. It's one of the fundamental things that you do is build up depleted soil. And I read that in farmland, you might be able to do the same thing. So when we're getting all these extra farms, or when other farms have all these problems, can you talk about large-scale ways of healing through agriculture?
We do think that, and it's a very good question, and it's really good to hear about all the stuff. I mean, I remember seeing those pictures of what you guys were doing on 10-10-10 here. It was beautiful, and the permaculture stuff is so exciting. And one of the reasons we got to keep the climate in some kind of check is just so that we can, we can keep those sort of things going, and it's important. We do think that we can sequester more carbon if we treat agricultural soils in different ways. At the moment, we've taken almost all the organic matter out of our soils, and we use synthetic fertilizer to provide fertility and so on and so forth. And that means that they are not good carbon sinks, but there are ways to make them better. And ironically, some of them are really interesting. There's been a lot of work in the last couple of years indicating that if you take large hooved animals, livestock, and graze them in ways that mimic the way that buffalo and antelope and things once grazed, i.e., you move them around, you have them very concentrated in small herds, and you move them around a lot the way that wolves used to, they create very rich soils that sequester more carbon and methane than the animals give off. So there are things that are possible, but none of them matter unless we also stop pouring carbon into the atmosphere, because nothing we can do can keep up with the pace at which we're going now. But there's tons of good, interesting, hopeful things going. And the irony of my outlook and my work in writing on all this is I love all these things, and I think that I really just sense that we're on the edge of a very new world that'll be very beautiful and work really well, and the only thing that can keep us from getting there is the kind of climatic destruction that we've got to head off, because it's just too big to overcome. You can have the most beautiful permaculture, local organic food system in the world, and if it doesn't rain for 30 days or it rains every day for 30 days, you're still not going to grow anything, So we got to make sure that the planet works in some kind of form. Very good question.
Hi, Bill. Bob Klotz. I'm with Occupy Maine TV, which is a blatant plug, but I was trying to stay to the end to give other people time. I appreciate your time for us to interview you earlier. One other question, and I don't know if you've spoken to the event on the 24th, but there's a great Keb Mo song called Victims of Comfort, and the line he has in it is that everybody wants to put on a party, but nobody wants to clean up. And we talk about an addiction to oil, but there seems to be an addiction to comfort or perceived comfort. And how do we speak to people who are really fearful that we're trying to take their comfort away? that fear seems to be a big part of it, addiction. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, you know, it's a very good question. You know, one of the important things always to do in a kind of consumer society is to have more fun than other people have. You know, that's one of the few subversive things that you can do in that society. And so, like, when we did this Moving Planet thing last fall, and it was all about transportation around the world, there were plenty of people who were doing, you know, studies about transportation and carbon emissions and stuff, but mostly we were like, get lots of people on bicycles wherever you are, because bicycles are a part of the solution, and because bicycles are one of the few tools that both rich people and poor people use, so there's real inherent solidarity in the whole thing, and because bicycles are fun. It's hard to be on one without smiling, and if you're in a group of, you know, 500 people riding bicycles together, it's one of the most amazing feelings in the world. It's like some big animal kind of snaking up the road, you know, and you feel really powerful, and we have to take some of that, you know, rub some of the glamour off the car and attach it to the bicycle, and anyway, if you go ride a bicycle all the time, then you'll be, you know, forget about comfort, you'll be a much sexier person than the, you know, person who's been sitting in the car all the time. You know, there's human drives even more basic than the drive for comfort, and important to take advantage of all of them. So it's a very good question, and you know, none of this should be dreary. All of it should be kind of beautiful, and even the fight itself is kind of beautiful. You know, even going off to jail is kind of beautiful, and the sort of feeling of solidarity among the people sitting there in the cell overnight and things was really kind of powerful. I don't hope it doesn't happen again all that soon, but it was more than worth it. Not only was it worth it, it was I'm glad it got to happen, and it's maybe, you know, on your bucket list something you should include.
I'm 11 years old, and I just wanted to know what I could do, what the best thing I could do is to help.
Sure. Tell me your name. Tell me your name.
Molly.
Molly. Good to meet you, Molly. Well, we've got tons of people at 350.org your age who are just terrific organizers. That's who puts together these big global days of action, you know, for us. And we do a lot of them at schools and at middle schools, and get kids involved. So all you need to do is just go sign up and then start thinking about the things that you're good at. So, you know, if you're good at art, we need artists. If you're good at music, we need musicians. If you're good at talking to other people, we'll get you out there, you know, knocking on doors and organizing. 11 is a perfectly good age to be doing all of this and doing it, you know. That's really one of the things we've, you know, realized. People who are 11 and people who are 78 and whatever are exactly as good at doing all this. And really, it tends to be people at these sort of far ends of the spectrum who are best at it in certain ways, because they're not quite as caught up in, you know, making a living all the time as people in the middle. So I'm glad you're on board. Thank you.
Hello, Bill Marino. I wanted to hear your thoughts on ridgeline wind turbines in the Northeast.
Ridgeline wind turbines in the Northeast. Well, you know, I won't speak for other places or people. I'm really hopeful that we'll get some up on Middlebury Gap, up above my house. We have a little old ski area up there, and it'd be a perfect place to put a few. We put up a wind testing turbine there last year, and before we could get much data from it, it blew over. So that struck me as a good sign. And I understand that there are aesthetic objections, and there's certain places where we shouldn't put them. If you got wilderness areas or you have to rip apart things or whatever, then don't do it. But I understand that there are aesthetic objections to it, and I guess I got to say, I think if those are the main problem, then that's not a good enough reason to oppose them. And I say that because, you know, when we're able to spin more wind power, we would displace some coal-fired power, usually someplace, you know. And when we do, that means that somebody who lives in, you know, West Virginia or Kentucky, it's that many fewer mountaintops that have to get blown apart. And the other thing about it is, whatever the aesthetic price or whatever we pay for some wind power, at least we're paying the price and we're getting the power. When we burn coal, the people who really pay the price are people in, you know, Bangladesh who watch the water rise and take away their farm, and they get dengue and whatever else. And they're getting none of the power and none of the benefit, and that's how it's been for a very long time. And that's not right. So we got to, you know, whether it's wind or some other way, we got to figure out how to be more self-reliant on renewable energy in places close to home. Don't rip apart, you know, every mountain range that you can think of, but do figure out what it is that's close to home that can provide some energy, be it, you know, the tide or the wind or the sun. And, you know, Maine's not any sunnier than Vermont, but I know that those solar hot water heaters will work just fine here, and they're cheap and they pay back fast, and get on them.
Excuse me, we have 3 more questions left.
Hi, I'm Bill Linnell. I'm a co-founder of Cheaper, Safer Power here in Maine, and led the successful fight to shut down the Maine Yankee nuclear plant 12 years early. Also went to Colby. And anyway, the nuclear industry will take all the concerns about climate change and say that they have the answer. And I have some responses to that, but I was just wondering if you could respond to that.
You know, I don't think nuclear is going to play a huge role in all of this, partly for all the reasons that everybody knows about. You know, post-Fukushima, the chance of people building one seemed small in most places to me. But mostly at this point also because it's incredibly expensive power. And we've run through, you might have noticed, a good deal of money in the last 4 or 5 years. We really don't have like an endless amount to just waste on things. And nuclear power, at the moment anyway, the current generation of nuclear power plants are a really expensive way to produce electricity. And we're probably better off, if we're going to subsidize anything, and all nuclear power gets subsidized, making sure that we put up renewable energy instead.
Hi, Bill. I'm John Hink. I serve in the state legislature, and I serve in the state legislature, and
you're running for something too, yes?
I'm actually a declared candidate for the U.S. Senate. Thank you. You know, I actually appreciate that you can come here and say that there are some people who are not good actors in this problem. You mentioned the oil companies. Years ago, I was involved in the lawsuit against the oil companies over the Exxon Valdez oil spill. I knew a little about climate change even then, and those 10,000 gallons at least didn't get burned and end up in the atmosphere, but that's not the way we want to go about it.
Yes, that may not be the best plan for you.
My question is actually this. You know, I feel, when I walked in here and saw how many people came to hear you speak, and you're speaking to people here and around the world, and the people involved in 350, I think collectively, they're more powerful than the oil companies. What do you have as ideas for channeling this energy and overcoming this little problem we have with the most wealthy, powerful industrial entities the world has ever known?
Well, for the moment, you know, the campaign for this for this winter has a lot to do with things that people are talking about with Occupy and corporate personhood, and we want to make, hopefully these referee shirts will become a kind of meme that spreads around the country. Because I think the place where these guys are most vulnerable is over this sense of fairness. If this isn't something you'd allow in a, high school science fair, if you didn't allow people to come in and buy the judges there, then we really should not allow it in Congress. It's not fair. And I think people are really beginning to wake up to that. One of the interesting statistics in the world right now is that the approval rating for Congress is at 9%. 13% of Americans approve of polygamy. 16% of Americans, somewhat bafflingly, approved of the Gulf oil spill, okay? So, ripping a hole in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico is twice as popular as the US Congress, all right? And it's because everybody knows that they're bought and paid for. The oil industry has, in essence, a harem on Capitol Hill that just waits to do what they're told. And that's wrong in every way. And the thing that keeps us from fixing it is our cynicism. We just think this is how it's always going to be, and they'll always win because they have all the money. We need to be aggressively naive about this, okay? I think we need to say, this is not right, this is not fair, it's not right, it makes no sense. We don't know how it got started, but it's time to stop it, okay? And we won't stop it perfectly all at once, but hopefully, we can begin to at least throw a scare into them. So if, we're going to have people all over the country, and they're going to be following around their congressmen with big signs pointing out how much money they've taken, and we're going to be making up, suit coats for them that look like those, uniforms that NASCAR drivers wear, with decals, logos for each of their companies, and we're going to, it's shameful what's going on, and there needs to be some shaming done, I guess. It's not really, it was interesting. I started thinking about this in December because one of these Washington political magazines, the thing called Politico, had me to this speak at this, their annual year, and I was up on the platform talking about energy, and the other people on the panel were a congressman from Massachusetts, Ed Markey, and this congressman from the Midwest, a guy named Lee Terry, who was a big proponent of building the pipeline and things. So I'm not good at this kind of thing, and it was kind of awkward, and we were there in Washington, but he was a very opposite side, but we were, I was being polite, and then without even thinking twice about it, I just sort of mentioned, someone said, what caused, the Congress to take, I said, well, Big Oil just sort of deployed its fleet of congressmen, to try. And the guy next to me bristled, and he was like, are you saying we're bought off? And I was, I'm like a Methodist Sunday school teacher. I was like, I felt like bad, like I'd been rude, and I was like, I don't know, whatever. But at a certain point, I just said, but you know, that is exactly what everybody in America thinks, right? You know that everybody, left, right, and center believes that about you, right? And it was a kind of interesting moment because it's just true, And I think if we start saying it and pointing out, not that it's a kind of futile thing that we'll never overcome, but that it's a bad thing that we need to overcome, that we have some chance. We've actually amended the Constitution 27 times before, so, that argues that we might be capable of doing it at 28th. We'll see.
Hi, Bill. My name is Meg Wolf. In the recent years, we've been hearing the slogan, veganism is the new Prius. Could you address moving towards a more plant-based diet for the health of the planet?
Sure. I think my old friend Michael Pollan is exactly right, you know. Eat, you know, what's his slogan? Not too much, mostly plants. Yeah, I mean, I think it makes great sense. I also don't think you need to be, you know, overly fanatic about it. One of the things, you know, I spend a lot of time out in the rest of the world, and there are lots and lots of places in the world where people, you know, one of the things that they really desire is to every once in a while have a little bit of meat with dinner, because they haven't, you know, they don't get much and it tastes good and whatever. And I don't think that's to be frowned on. In fact, I think there's a lot to be learned from. If you're going to eat, one way to think about it is to say, if you're going to eat meat, not only should you go find good meat from good farmers doing good things in your neighborhood, but you should, you know, tend to eat it the way that people do in the rest of the world, which is in small amounts as a kind of flavoring for kind of condiments, you know, not the kind of large honking slab culinary technique that we have favored in this country, you know. There's always a danger with environmentalism, as with many other things, of being overly dogmatic and turning people off. And so it's good not to do that too. As I said before, I think that the secret is to have more fun than other people have, and part of that involves, you know, eating delicious, good things close to home. And frankly, I think we may have reached the point where I'm going to stop so I can go eat some of them. Thank you all.